I wanted to come up with a shock and surprise face for some of the stuff that we're dealing with tonight. I thought, well, a little bit of humor before we get into everything else is not going to be bad for us at all. So it's been a couple of weeks since we've done our kind of regular Tuesday night schedule. We do sort of our worldview component at the beginning, then we jump into our Bible study. And so it's been a little while since we've done This Week in Woke. And what happens when it's been a little while is that my material grows like a small mountain. It just shows up over and over and over and over and over again. All kinds of stuff has been going on over the last 2 or 3 weeks, including our favorite Bond villain character. He's been at work again the last few weeks, and I'm sure more of his stuff will come up. This is the guy who believes that the human genome can be hacked and then manipulated by the World Economic Forum, and just all kinds of crazy stuff, right? So he's back at it again. But I wanted to spend time on a couple of things that have come to the surface in large part because it is Pride Month. Pride Month, if you've noticed, if you've paid attention, Pride Month just continues to go crazier and crazier every single year. More than any other year, Pride Month this year is essentially about drag queen strip hour, the trans issue and so forth, puberty blockers, sexual transition therapy, surgeries, and so on and so forth. Just more and more of that being pushed constantly. If you don't want to bother with this stuff, I'd encourage you, just don't even look it up. Don't even watch it, because it's just enormously bothersome. But I want to make sure that we hit on a couple of things and then, again, reflect about it through the lens of Scripture and just kind of take a look at a couple of things. So the first thing I have for you here is a study by a group called the Worldview Research Organization. So this is just a secular research organization. They just keep track of the different kinds of surgeries that individuals have and how often they have it. This particular study was on gender transformation surgeries. And so I want to read just a couple of things about this here. This major paragraph here in the upper left-hand corner. The U.S. sex reassignment surgery market size was valued at $267 million in 2019. It is expected to expand at a compound annual growth rate of 14.4% from 2020 to 2027. The rising incidences of gender dysphoria and the increasing number of people deciding for, and you've got to love this language. Remember, again, the language is so important to shaping people's understanding or beliefs about a thing. Gender confirmation surgery. So it's not gender change or alteration surgery, it's gender confirmation. So we will physically and hormonally change you to confirm who you actually are. So you just kind of noticed again how the language works. Are expected to boost market growth over the forecast period. Sex reassignment surgery is performed by a multi-specialty staff that usually involves board-certified or licensed plastic surgeons. So what they're doing is they're tracking the number of surgeries that have been clocked by the plastic surgeons who were involved in this process. So this is the little graph that they show, what they show in the projected trends. The blue there in the top are female to male transitions. The purple in the bottom is male to female. So you can see the trend line is female to male. And again, by and large, the more I read about this stuff, we're not talking about women who are in their 30s and 40s. We're talking about girls who are 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. So that's by and large the crowd that's having this done. The very next paragraph after this one says this, and this is what's on the right. According to the 2019 plastic surgery statistics by the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, around 11,000 gender confirmation or sex reassignment surgeries were performed in the U.S., which was around 10 to 15% higher than the previous year, and they expect it to grow about 14% every single year. The increasing number of sex reassignment surgeries in the U.S. will propel the growth of the market during the forecast period. So almost a $300 million a year industry is just going to continue to grow, right? And we've got to use this language of gender confirmation surgery. I was telling Heather, one of the most difficult things about trying to deal with this issue on Tuesday night is not being grossly explicit. So this is why I have to find studies as opposed to even just pieces of journalism or Twitter threads by people who have had these surgeries done and have what is called trans regret, and they describe what's happened to them. Because it just most folks wouldn't even be able to read through those things without getting just physically sick. So we have to pay attention to the studies. Well, a lot of what's going on in the vocabulary right now is that especially puberty blockers and hormone therapy the phrase is completely reversible. We give them to kids, and one organization is trying to approve one particular puberty blocker for kids as young as 5 years old. So when you start giving them, and one of the drugs they give is a drug called Lupron, which is a drug that is given to pedophiles to castrate them. So this is sterilization therapy that they're going through. There's nothing not reversible about it. It's all irreversible, and that's what the trans regret community is all about. So this study was done by a group of people at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. I love the fact that there are people who are willing to do these kinds of studies. In large part, you and I then just kind of see, well, the science doesn't back up what we're being told. So we're being told that you give kids puberty blockers to avoid the psychological harm that leads to suicide. If you give them puberty blockers and if they go through transition, then the rates of suicide go down. That's what we're being told, whereas a matter of fact, just the opposite is the case. And that's exactly what this particular study shows. So I love the fact that these studies are being done. Again, it sort of puts an arrow in your quiver, so to speak. Well, science actually says this is really bad for people. What is really bothersome is that these studies have to be done, that the scientific default position is more and more we should give kids puberty blocking drugs and hormone therapy. Well, we have to, push back against that. So this is the abstract. This is the summary of this study that they've done. Lowering legal barriers to make it easier for minors to undergo cross-sex medical interventions without parental consent does not reduce suicide rates. In fact, it likely leads to higher rates of suicide among young people in states that adopt these changes. States should instead adopt parental bills of rights that affirm the fact that parents have primary responsibility for their children's education and health, and that require school officials and health professionals to receive permission from parents before administering health services. Now, a lot of it's anecdotal, but inside of this debate, more and more stories are being recorded by journalists as well as in other formats and so forth of parents who are realizing sometimes 2-3 years later that the school that they've been sending their children to have been what's called socially transitioning them. So they go to school and their teachers in their school treat them as the opposite gender, and in some cases have started hormone therapy on these kids without parental consent. So these stories are starting to grow in number. Including medication and gender-affirming counseling to children under 18. States should also tighten the criteria for receiving cross-sex treatments, including raising the minimum eligibility age. All right, so we've talked about this kind of thing from time to time, but every now and then it's good for us to pay attention to some of these details. But these lines that God has drawn inside of the human body, male and female, this particular worldview is starting to blur. It's not just moral relativism, it is a version of biological relativism, which is a really, really bizarre thing. But we are most definitely inside of that universe and that world right now. I want to eventually get to why relativism is tyranny, but I want us to see some of this and how this actually plays itself out. So here's just sort of the tip of the iceberg in this kind of world. This worldview, we're just calling it wokeism. This week in woke, this kind of worldview continues to make its way inside the church as well. So this one's fun, the PCUSA, which if you know the PCUSA, this is not all that surprising, but they're developing new curriculum, Bible study curriculum, that they're calling Queering the Bible. It's their project aimed at what they're calling creating some new theologies. And this report, this was This one just showed up 2 or 3 days ago. One of the Christian news services, Christian Post Reporter, there it is. But they proudly, inside of this article, said, you know, what we're doing is we're beginning with the Gospel of Mark. We're going through the Gospel of Mark, and we're identifying all of the individuals in the Gospel of Mark who can sympathize with the queer experience. And the particular example that they give, that they're sticking in their curriculum, is John the Baptist. So John the Baptist lived a very different life on the outside of normal circles, and so he identifies with the queer experience. So they're building this new theology. Now, the PCUSA has gone this direction for several years now, so it's not very surprising that a denomination like the PCUSA is doing this. This one hit the news a little while ago, and just some lovely flowers to make you feel better for just a second or two. All right. So books to read for Pride Month. You might see that you might expect that from all kinds of different publishers. This particular publisher, up in the left-hand corner there, this was on the official blog of a publisher called Erdman's. Now, Erdman's is not a publishing house that happens to publish Christian books. Erdman's has been, from its very beginning, an explicitly Christian publisher, an orthodox, mainstream, evangelical Christian publishing house. Where over the last several years, they've been publishing books that affirm the LGBTQ lifestyle in one fashion or another. So at the beginning of the month, they posted this on their website. They threw it out there on Twitter for everybody to see. They got all of this crazy backlash, and so they took it down for a couple of days. And then they reposted it with some explanation. I'm going to give you some, just at least some information about this. When neutrality is a myth. So this is an op-ed piece from World Magazine. World Magazine is a really solid Christian reporting and Worldview and opinion magazine. Well, they did a piece on this particular issue, and they went through Erdman's information, and they talked to Erdman's, and they published this piece. So if you want to sit down and actually read through this entire piece of reporting and its opinion as well, it's on World Magazine's site, When Neutrality is a Myth. But this was one of the primary conclusions that they drew after dealing with Erdman's on this issue, and it's on the next slide there. So what the article of that, what the author of that article concludes in the first part, is this: pay close attention here. Erdman's says it is happy to host a debate. It will publish authors who support and promote LGBTQ ideology. It will also publish authors who do not, but it will not publish authors who actively oppose LGBTQ ideology. So if you're wholly in favor of it, we'll support you. If you have a couple of misgivings, but otherwise you're in favor of it, we will publish you as well. But if you want to publish the biblical point of view on this, we're not going to publish you at all. But this is how this works. This is such an incredible point when it comes to this kind of stuff. When this ideology gets inside of an organization, it becomes that organization's ideology. It's not one of the ideas. It doesn't belong to 3 or 4 members in the HR department. Over time, it becomes that company's ideology. Some of you may remember what the Salvation Army did before Christmas. They stuck that up. We actually went through a lot of it. They had received a lot of pushback, but it was very woke. It was all about white supremacy, and all whites are naturally racists, and all that good stuff that we've talked about off and on. They took some of it down. They left some of it up. They said they were going to study and come back and re-report. Well, as of about a month and a half ago, it went through my mind. I thought, well, I'll go check it. They have not changed any of their position whatsoever. So when it gets inside of a system, it's designed to take over a system. But that is in large part because it is a certain version of moral and religious relativism. So here's how I want to talk about this, thinking about this from a biblical point of view, a biblical worldview. This relativizing of biology, this relativizing of sexual morality, gender ideology, all of these sorts of things, I think we're starting to understand that it's not simple relativism. So relativism is an ever-spinning tyrant. It is forever spinning out of control. It is forever going further and further and further down the moral toilet. There's no place for it to stop. There's no place for it to stop. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Every human being in this ideology, this woke ideology, every human being has been sexualized at every age. And according to this ideology, that's one of your two primary character traits. One is your skin color, and the other is your sexual identity, and that's all that there is to you. One of the phrases that's rising to the surface now more and more is that childhood is a continuum. Now, why would someone say that childhood is a continuum? Because you want to decriminalize pedophilia. That's what's happening. And it's this woke language that's coming to the surface more and more. Well, can you really tell me who a child is? They're sometimes called intergenerational encounters as opposed to pedophilia. So, right, every human being, every human being, so relativism is like a toilet that's ever flushing. It's going down and down and down and down constantly. So wokeism is not an academic principle that belongs in a handful of books. It's not an analytical tool that is only used by some specialized professors at some Ivy League universities. It's not. It is politics. It is intended to change every institution it is involved with. This is just how this system works. That's in what they write. That's in their fundamental, their foundational articles and books. Even though their front-facing personality says, don't worry about it, no one's really teaching this. You read their stuff and they say everybody should be teaching this and believing this. It's just the way that it goes. But here's how this kind of relativism becomes tyrannical. I want to make sure as Christians that we sort of understand this, because there are a couple of really important keys here that if we grab a hold of them, it helps make perfect sense as to how and why this happens. So the rejection of objective morality that is above and beyond you and me or every culture, some sort of moral or religious truth that is true for everybody at all times. So believing in the God of the Bible, we believe in the objective truth of the God of Scripture. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he means that for everybody all the time. That's what we mean by objective truth, objective morality. But the rejection of objective morality does not create a tolerant moral free-for-all, meaning anybody can do or believe whatever they want to. It actually becomes viciously tyrannical. We end up having one very narrow view of life that, by the way, we are going to constantly change. And if you don't agree with us, then you're going to feel our wrath. This is how this kind of relativism works. So what relativism does is it detaches morality from objective reason in God. And as far as a Christian is concerned, thinking through how reality works goes hand in glove with thinking about how God has created reality. So I'm not talking about two different ways of seeing things. I'm talking about one way of seeing things. This is how God has built things. So relativism detaches morality from objective reason and from God, but it doesn't leave it unattached. It doesn't leave it unattached. It reattaches it to something else. And here's what it does. Relativism attaches morality to the most powerful cultural trends. So as a result, only powerful people can define morality. This is the world that they want to create, that they're trying to create. So if there is some kind of political or media power behind some individuals or some ideas, that's then what we've attached morality to. We use those as the disseminators of morality and as the definers of morality, which means that's going to change all the time, right? Because that group of people is going to change constantly, but we're just going to go ahead and go with the flow because we've defined our objective moral truth in terms of a group of powerful people. So without an objective fixed point for both of us to refer to that doesn't depend on us, but we both point to, only power determines what is right or wrong. That's it. That's why cancel culture is a big deal. That's why who's being kicked off of a certain media platform is a big deal in some circles, because it just reduces to power. Now, this is, in my little world, as a guy who spent a lot of time reading about this stuff 20 years ago, this is one of the most profound, ironic twists in the last several decades. Because the postmodern worldview that blew through the church in the 90s and the early 2000s, the postmodern worldview said that if you believe in truth, then you're just imposing your truth on other people and you're a colonizer. You're just imposing your power on other people. So people who are writing inside of the church, they were pastors, they were theologians, they were professors, and they're writing things like, we should probably think about redoing missions because we can't impose our truth on other people, because it's just a power play. The ironic thing is that when you do this, when you become postmodern, when you become a relativist, all you have left is power. That's all you have left. So this is why this language is important. Now, nobody can convince, you can only enforce. You can't convince with reason, because that is out. You now have to enforce ideas by power. That's why you hide what you're doing from parents. That's why you throw certain people off of social media platforms, all this kind of thing, right? Because we've lost the ability to convince, now we're just left with power. Now we just enforce with power. And so it inevitably turns into censorship, fear, and marginalizing. This is just how relativism works. That's just how this worldview works, which is part of what makes us so profoundly different. And part of what makes us so profoundly important to the world around us is for the follower of Jesus Christ to stay connected to these truths and not just learn how to stay connected to them, but to learn how to communicate them and live them and speak of them in the contexts that God has given us, right? Because this is the kind of thing that's just kind of swirling around the church right now. It's just saying moored in truth and love is such a big deal for the church in so many ways.